All right, we're going to continue on with subtask 3 and 4, which can actually be found on pages 3 and 4 of the Learning Target homework. And this picks up with the idea of the unequal flow of energy from one trophic level to the next. Essentially, a lot of energy is actually lost. So we can see here, if you're considering the energy available and eaten from the grass as 100%, a lot of that energy doesn't actually get stored as the biomass of an organism. Some of it is wasted because it can't be used, and some of it is lost as heat. In fact, a great amount of it will be lost as heat. So the idea here is that you're going to be using cell respiration a lot in organisms, especially animals, especially at higher trophic levels, so that they can create ATP, and that ATP can power their processes. Now, cell respiration also generates quite a bit of heat. Energy is lost during that process in the form of heat, which will then radiate out from the organism and be lost to the environment and eventually the atmosphere and the planet Earth itself. So, aside from the heat lost from respiration, we would like to use that ATP to do a variety of processes in that organism, but there might be other reasons why that energy transfer from the plants into this cow is not 100% efficient. So organisms might not be able to absorb certain things that they eat or digest them, and some parts might actually remain uneaten, bones or the woody portions of plants. Aside from that, it is very, very important to know that heat is the main way that this energy transfer is made inefficient. So when we're looking at this inefficient energy transfer, it's worth noting that there are some other ways that we use our chemical energy and change it from one form into another. So any of the food you've eaten, any of your breakfast, lunch, or dinners, they would contain molecules that have energy stored in the bonds of those molecules. And as you go through life, you're doing a variety of processes that take that chemical energy and change it into another form. Energy is never created or destroyed, it is just transferred. So kinetic energy, like movement, muscular contractions, that would take your stored chemical energy and change it into kinetic energy, movement energy. Electrical energy, when you do nerve impulses in your brain, that takes chemical energy and changes it into electrical energy. Light energy is not something we do a lot, but some creatures can bioluminesce. Other forms of chemical energy, you take the energy in some molecules and you use it to build other molecules. Protein synthesis by ribosomes would be a good example there. Sound energy, and the way I'm communicating with you right now. And lastly, heat energy. Sometimes heat is an unintended loss of energy, but for us, we actually use that energy to keep our bodies at a warm temperature and regulate that temperature so that our enzymes function properly. That would make us an endotherm. So building off of that, we get to this idea of a pyramid of energy. And that's going to show the flow of energy in another way, again moving from producers to primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. And the thing with a pyramid of energy is that it's going to show the amount of energy in that trophic level sort of physically represented as the size of a box. Now, the one thing that is not accurate about this pyramid of energy is that these boxes should be proportional to each other given how much energy they store. And unfortunately, that is not the way that this is shown here now. But it does show you that there's a great amount of energy stored in the producers. Far less energy makes its way into the primary consumers, even less into the secondary, and by far the least energy is stored at the top of the food chain in the tertiary consumers. Now, we can actually measure the amount of energy in these different groups, and the unit of energy is a little bit weird. I don't need you to understand exactly what this unit means, but it is worth knowing that we're going to have a unit of energy per area in an amount of time. And so if you were to measure the energy in, say, a group of producers, that trophic level, that feeding position, you would measure it in kilojoules per meter squared year. Again, here's our unit of energy, thousands of joules. We have an area, meter squared, and we have a time frame, year. So essentially it's saying, here's how much energy is inside of a square meter of that group in a year. I prefer this way of drawing it. kilojoules over meters squared year, but this actually means the same thing. And so one of the things to keep in mind here is that the energy loss is very significant. Roughly 10% of the energy in one group is actually transferred into the next group. All the other 90% is lost, which is why this is not a proportional pyramid. I wish it was, but I don't have that today. The producers, if they had 1,000 kilojoules of energy, we can predict that only 10% will make it to the next level, meaning the primary consumers are only going to have 100 kilojoules of energy. 10 in the next group, and only 1 at the top of the food chain. So really, this box should not be about half the width of the producers. It should be 1/10 of the width. Maybe only about that big right there, even skinnier, and just a little sliver up in the tertiary consumers. Now, what this ultimately means is that we need to remember that the reason 90% of that energy is lost is because of things you're not eating, not digesting or excreting, or heat that is lost as these organisms are doing cell respiration. Ultimately, what this means is that we're not going to get very efficient energy transfer, meaning that there is less energy available to each trophic group as you move up. That's going to limit their population and the number of individuals that there are. It's also going to limit the length of a food chain. You cannot have a food chain that is very many members long because by the time you get to that food chain, there's almost no energy left. This is one of the reasons that in population studies, you will find a very small number of top predators compared to the organisms that they prey on and the organisms that they prey on and the plants that ultimately feed them. Their populations should be proportional roughly to the amount of energy in their trophic level. So, pyramids of energy always get smaller the higher up you go. Ultimately, the bars should be drawn to scale. Again, I apologize that these are not, but when you do it, you should make sure that they are drawn to scale. You should also make sure that the boxes are labeled with their trophic group and that an amount of energy is shown at each trophic level if that's what you're being asked to do. The bottom level will always represent producers. Sometimes folks like to put the sun at the bottom. However, the sun is not a living organism and it's not a trophic level. It does not have a feeding position. It's just the source of energy. So the sun should not be down at the bottom. It should always start with producers. And lastly, I want to finish with this idea that as you move up between trophic levels, the biomass is going to decrease. There's going to be less physical matter in that group if you were to put them all together. So biomass can indirectly measure the energy in a group. Biomass is just their dry weight. So if you removed all the water from them, how much mass is left over? Again, that should be roughly proportional to what we have here, where the amount of dry weight of plants is going to be about 10 times the dry weight of the herbivores that consume them, which would be 10 times the dry weight of any carnivores that consume them. Ultimately, this means that most food chains cannot be longer than about 3 to 6 organisms. At that point, you have run out of so much energy. There's so much energy lost between these trophic transfers that you don't really have enough energy to make or survive an organism or their group. So with that, I think we should be good on subtask 3 and 4. Again, please reach out if you have any questions. This is a new process for everybody, and I'm learning just the way you folks are. Give me feedback if you need anything different or if you have any suggestions for the way I'm running these video lectures.